Valley?
Near San Jose.
Awesome. And then you guys, I know you guys, where you're from. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Just to remind you guys, we are practicing social distancing. I don't think I have to worry too much about it with such a small group. But yeah, just make sure that you're maintaining 6 feet of distance between people you don't know, as well as the rangers, just to keep everybody safe. I do have a couple of props that I will be showing you guys. I'll come around, but it'll be brief, and I'll have my mask on, so we don't have to worry about anything there. Okay, let's get started. So my name is Kelsie Jackson. I'm an intern through the IIC, which is a program through Southern Utah University where I'm a student. And I get to be up here in the summertime for interpretation. So I'm really excited to be up here talking about geology with you guys. Originally from Bellingham, Washington. I don't know if you guys know where that's at. But yeah. Oh, you did? Very cool. It's a beautiful place. Yeah, so, oh, go ahead.
I just said yes it is.
Oh, yes, yeah.
I got a friend that lives on Whidbey Island. We stayed there.
Oh my gosh, Whidbey Island is beautiful. I love that place. Nice, yeah. Yeah, so I'm down here for school. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to be talking about geology today. I want you all to imagine that you woke up bright and early this morning before the sun came up, and you walked out here to Point Supreme with an easel, paintbrushes, and paints. As plein air painters and landscape enthusiasts, you guys can't wait to begin painting the amphitheater of Cedar Breaks. Hi, how are you?
Good.
So you can't wait to begin painting the landscape of Cedar Breaks. Now you get everything set up, you're ready to go, but you hesitate for a moment and you wonder, how did these layers and these beautiful colors get here? So why were you using your red, your yellow, your orange, and even your purple paints on your palette? Okay, so let's flash back 60 million years ago to when we would all be standing in water. Now this whole place was called Lake Claron, and Lake Claron was surrounded by mountains. Actually, all of southwestern Utah was surrounded by huge mountains on all sides. And because of these mountains, there was sediments that were being brought down from them into the bottom of Lake Claron. And this was continuing year after year after year, bringing in different sediments. And then some years would be dry, some years would be wet. And during the dry years, the sediments would kind of harden and solidify and create a layer. And then the next year, more sediment would come and compact and create a layer, until eventually this whole basin was full. Now, there was also these really cool little creatures that lived in Lake Claron. I'll show you guys something pretty neat. Okay. Can you guys tell me what this is? It is a fossil. Do you know what type of fossil it is?
A swirly type.
It is swirly. Yes. Snail, yeah. So this is a snail fossil. So snails love to live in Lake Claron.
Oh yeah.
At the bottom, where they would kind of hang out in the muddy ooze, which sounds gross to us, but they probably really liked it. And what would happen is they'd live a really long, happy life down at the bottom, and then when they died, their shells would compact and crush and form the limestone that we see out in the amphitheater. Now, limestone, in its purest state, is white. So how does that explain the cool colors that you guys see? All right, does anybody know what county we are in right now? Close. Iron, yeah, Iron County. So while all of these sediments were coming into the bottom of Lake Claron, they were taking trace amounts of iron and depositing them as well. And when everything was closed up, it was all pretty much white underneath, and now that the breaks are exposed to air, it starts to oxidize. Has anybody seen what happens to a bike after it gets wet and you leave it outside for a while? What happens?
Rust.
It rusts, exactly. So rust is responsible for the reds and the yellows and the oranges that you see, and that's why you have to use those paints in your palette. Now, what about the purple? Do you guys see any purple out there? Kind of towards the top. You see the purple? So that's because of manganese. Manganese gives it that really cool purple color. It mixes with the iron. All right. Okay. So back to painting. So you've been painting for a couple hours now, trying to hone in on those really delicate hues and colors and shadows. And you're starting to get a little bit tired and you think you need a break. Your legs are calling out to be stretched, so you decide to get up and walk around. You walk over here, you see the cute firs and the pretty spruces, a hummingbird blows past your head and you're like, whoa, this is so cool. And you start running around seeing all the great things we have at Cedar Breaks. You start to realize that you're kind of lightheaded and it's a little hard to breathe. Can anybody tell me what altitude we're at up here at Cedar Breaks? You know?
10,000?
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, so right here at Point Supreme, we're at 10,350 feet. You saw the sign over there, huh? Awesome, yeah. Okay, so we're really, really high above sea level. And you guys are coming from California, so that's quite a jump, right? Make sure that you're drinking plenty of water.
Yeah.
But yeah, so how did we get up here? Has anybody heard of the Colorado Plateau? Have you guys heard of that before? Okay, so this chunk of land is really, really important. It's right in the middle of southwestern Utah, and it's home to 8 national parks. Now, it's home to Zion, Bryce, kind of our sister park, the Grand Canyon, and tons of national monuments. So what makes this place so spectacular is that it's been risen up. And without the rising of the land, none of what we see would be possible. So, has anybody heard of a fault before?
California.
Yes, exactly. You know all about faults, right?
Yeah, we live on one. Yep.
Oh, yep, that's
Yeah, I
true.
live on one too. So.
Yeah, so we're actually really close to one right now, too. So, I don't know if you guys can see, but it's a little hazy, but down past the mountains over there is Cedar City. And Cedar City sits at about 5,800 feet, and there's a fault that separates us. Now, okay, everyone put your hands together like this. So we're gonna kind of tell what a fault does. So this side is Cedar City, this side is Cedar Breaks. Now, a fault is kind of a crack in the land that allows movement to occur, right? Like earthquakes and things like that. So what happens over time is kind of rumbles a little bit like this, and then eventually one starts to kind of raise up. Now Cedar Breaks is starting to raise up, and Cedar City is starting to lower. Now, we're at the very edge of the Colorado Plateau, and then Cedar City is at the very beginning of the Basin Range extension. Okay, so we talked about the deposition from Lake Claron, and then we just talked about uplift, right? Now, none of this would be possible without uplift. And what comes next is weathering and erosion. All right. Okay, so you've been walking around, taking a break for a minute, and you decide you're ready to start painting. The day is kind of winding down, and you're determined to finish your masterpiece today. So, you sit back down, you're ready to begin, and you find yourself looking at all the really weird, intricate formations out in the amphitheater. And you remember hearing a ranger earlier in the day talk about something called a hoodoo. Now, does anybody know what a hoodoo is? Yeah, do you know what it is? Did you guys come from Bryce Canyon, anybody?
We did.
Okay, so Bryce Canyon, they have the same similar features that we do here at Cedar Breaks. Now, a hoodoo is kind of a freestanding pillar of rock. I kind of like to think of them as fingers. Now, Bryce Canyon, our sister park, they have the most hoodoos out of any national park in the United States. Here we have hoodoos, but they're eroding much faster. Now, how do they erode? So, because we are so high up, we get so much snow. So on average, during the winter time, we get about 15 feet of snow, which is twice the height of me. And then last year we had 23 feet of snow, which is 3 times the height of me, and I'm really tall. Can you imagine that? Isn't that crazy? Okay, so what happens is we get tons of snow, right? So everyone put your hand up like this, with all your fingers together. This is gonna represent a fin. Now a fin is a term we like to use for rock that's been eroded, and it's kind of skinny, but it hasn't been broken up into hoodoos yet. It's right before hoodoos. Okay. So we get snow, right? That comes on top, right? And what happens is it gets a little sunny, so the snow decides that it wants to melt. So it melts and it kind of seeps down into these cracks, right? And what happens to water when it freezes? Does anybody know?
Expand.
It expands, that's right, yeah. So when water expands, it kind of forces everything around it to move. Have you guys ever filled up a water bottle and put it in the freezer, and then the next day you look at it? What happens to it?
Bigger.
It explodes, right? Because all that water stuck inside needs a place to go. So that's what's happening in between the rocks. So the water seeps down in there, and the cycle continues freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing, and over years it starts to pry the rock apart. Until eventually you have freestanding hoodoos. Now that's how you get the general placement of hoodoos. So how do they get their funky shape? All right. I don't know if you guys can tell right now, but when you get a chance to get up and walk around and look at the hoodoos, you'll tend to notice there's usually a big rock on top and a kind of skinnier rock underneath. Now, why does that happen? So, we talked about erosion just barely, right? So we're going to talk about weathering. Weathering is like dissolving of rocks or breaking down of rocks. And what happens is we get rainfall on the amphitheater on top of the hoodoos. Now, what happens when that rainwater, it's really a weak acid that starts to react with the limestone and dissolve it. What happens is it starts to break down those rocks. Now, the big rock on top is limestone, but with a superpower. We call it dolomite. And that's a mixture of magnesium and limestone. So it's a little bit resistant to the weak acid in the rain. Now, I'll show you guys real quick. We'll show you the reaction that happens. And I'll come around real fast and show you. So the water hits the rock and it starts to dissolve it. Representation of the rainwater hitting the limestone. It just fizzes a little bit. Now this is amplified. It happens at a much slower, less drastic rate. It's kind of fizzing still, you can see. All right. Okay, so that's what's happening. Now the dolomite, it doesn't really happen that much to it. What happens is the rainwater, it kind of comes on top of the big rock on top of the hoodoo, and it reacts a little bit, but not really a whole lot is going on. So what happens is the water kind of goes along the top, down the sides, and starts eating away at the rock kind of underneath, until eventually this rock gets so heavy and this part gets so weak that it falls over. And it may seem kind of sad, but that's just part of, nature. That's what happens. Bryce Canyon, it happens a lot slower. Here, our hoodoos are gone a lot quicker. So
Why is that?
well, they're an east-facing amphitheater, so they're a little bit protected, I guess. And then they don't get nearly as much snow that we do up here, and we're a little bit higher too. And here we hit freezing about 250 days out of the year, and up there it's a little bit less. So we're having it at a much faster rate. Okay, so we talked about the sedimentation, and that's how we get the cool layers, right? And then we also talked about uplift. And after uplift, we talked about weathering and erosion, and that's how you get the cool formations you see out in the amphitheater. Okay, so the only thing that's left for us to do is to finish our painting. So you sit down, you're honing in on the details, you finish one last hoodoo, and all you have to do is sign your name. Once you do that, you sit back, admire your masterpiece, as well as the masterpiece that is Cedar Breaks. And the sun begins to set, casting a beautiful glow on the amphitheater that starts to light it up like a fire. And then as the sun goes down, you grab all of your things, you begin walking back to your car, the stars start coming out, and you can't wait to spend the next day up at Cedar Breaks painting the layers. Thank you guys for painting the layers today with me. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. You can come up and get a closer look at the props if you guys would like afterwards. Just make sure that you're maintaining 6 feet of distance. And thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.